Today's video is sponsored by Native Sons Goods, makers of premium quality guitar, bag, and camera straps, handmade in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Check out their website to order your own custom creation and play in style. And remember, when you support my sponsors, you support this channel, and I sure appreciate it.
Hey y'all, it's Shitpost Friday.
Hello lads and ladies, Brad the Guitarologist here, and it's time for Shitpost Friday. First up, I want to talk about the new Gibson and Guitar Center news. Yes, both of those are back in the news and at the same time. First with Gibson, since December of last year, Gibson has been involved in a lawsuit in Hamburg, Germany, and for some reason it's just now hitting the news here. But they've been sued for $50 million by the company that did the R&D. I guess they outsourced the R&D, which this I did not know. I thought they did this in-house, but apparently they outsourced all of the R&D for the robo-tuning devices. Either that or this other company developed the device independently and just licensed it to Gibson. Either way, they had an agreement for licensing, and according to Tronicle, the company that is suing Gibson, they are owed $23 million in agreed profits from the contract and a further $27 million for breach of contract, I guess for what should have been future royalties. Either way, this news couldn't come at a really worse time for Gibson right now, that with them being embroiled in what's going to end up being their bankruptcy, Chapter 11 this year. I think their debts are due later in the year around August, so they've got until that time, I guess, to try to come up with $50 million to buy these guys off, or they could just wait around and either pay them in stock, or maybe even, if they're lucky, they won't have to give them anything. Maybe that's what they're banking on. If you'll remember also a while back, I reported on this channel about Gibson laying off a bunch of their workers from their custom shop. Also at that same time, Heritage Guitars had laid off a bunch of their workers, so it was kind of interesting that that had happened simultaneously. But now Guitar Center's getting in on the act, and they are laying off a bunch of their corporate workers. So this is a slightly different than the Gibson scenario. They're not laying off people in the actual stores, but they are still somewhat in keeping with the Gibson scenario. They're laying off some of their more expensive workers, which are the suits at corporate. According to this article, which was reported by Gear Gods, one of their former employees, I guess that had been sacked or laid off, was disgruntled and went to Gear Gods to report their story of what's going on. And basically they report a revolving door of executives who have no experience in guitars. This is something that's pretty rampant in the corporate world, and that's the reason why usually, you know, big box stores, they don't seem to move with the flow of what's happening at the grassroots level a lot of times, because their stuff comes from the top down rather than the bottom up. You know, independent music stores, local stores, they can usually respond a lot easier to local trends and things like that, whereas top-down stores, they just kind of impose. It's kind of like terrestrial radio. You know, one company owns like hundreds of radio stations, so everybody in the US gets to listen to the same shit over and over again. Well, it's kind of the same thing. And here the CEO, the current CEO of Guitar Center, is a guy who actually used to be the CEO, and I did not know this either until reading this article. He used to be the CEO of Jo-Ann Fabrics. My wife shops at Jo-Ann Fabrics, if that tells you anything. So also, according to this article, Guitar Center has around 7,000 employees nationally, and they're laying off less than 1% of those employees. But still, once again, those are some of the more expensive employees. They're struggling probably month to month to make payroll. Usually when companies are struggling to make payroll, these are the sorts of things that you'll see them do. They'll start to try to identify jobs that are not critical to try to streamline things so that they can make payroll.
Good luck with your layoffs, all right? I hope your firings go really well.
Excellent. Great.
Wow.
They at least say now they're not planning on reducing staff at any of the 260 plus stores, but I mean, with corporate like this, you never can tell. I would just say to the employees at Guitar Center, I wouldn't get too stuck in my job if I were you, to be honest, man. I've seen this sort of thing happen before, and it usually doesn't end well. We've already had big bankruptcies and store closings this year. In fact, 2018 is probably going to be one of the worst years for retail in quite a long time. things not really looking good for Guitar Center long term. This article was interesting, I thought. This is sort of an addendum to what we talked about on last Shitpost Friday when we talked about Rosewood and CITES regulations and the like. This article talks about something that I've read about before, which is Taylor's project on preserving ebony groves in Cameroon.
Hello, Bob Taylor here. As a guitar player, I appreciate that you're always thinking about where does this wood come from? How is it obtained? Is it sustainable? We thought, why don't we prepare this visual experience for you here, divided into many, many chapters, each one of a different topic, from cutting the wood to planting the wood. What is agroforestry? The people of Cameroon. So come along with me. Enjoy the experience.
If you're interested in this, check it out. It says here they're planning on doing like a multi-part digital experience chronicling the work that they've been doing, which should help a little bit with the public relations and how the guitar industry is viewed by environmentalists. If you're interested in learning more about this initiative by Taylor, go to taylorguitars.com/ebony project and be sure to check that out. It looks interesting. If you're like me and you're a Tool fan and you've been waiting 100+ years for their new album, you can kind of stem the tide there if you want to go check this out. This is they're doing exclusive music clinics. It's going to cost you a pretty penny, but you will presumably get to at least hear the guys jam together, and maybe they'll do Q&A. I'm not sure what the format is going to be, but looking at the venues here, they have several dates, 6 different dates in Minnesota, Chicago, Indianapolis, which isn't that far from me. A couple in Ohio, one in Michigan. So if you are into Tool like I am, you might want to go check this out. Now this is not going to have Maynard James Keenan, the lead singer, but it will have Adam Jones, Danny Carey, and Justin Chancellor. And according to this, once again, it's some kind of clinic, including an intimate discussion about the band's music and technique. And that seamlessly segues into this week's Influences segment, which is about Tool. Tool is one of those bands that I did not get into at first, interestingly enough. Very much like Nirvana before them. Some of the bands that I've liked the most in my life, I didn't really take to immediately. It took several listens for me to really get into Tool. Now, whenever Undertow came out, obviously I liked Sober and I liked Prison Sex and some of the other stuff on there, but really didn't get into too deep into their stuff. But whenever the album Enema came out, I went and saw them in '97 in support of that album at Lollapalooza, I think it was that year, and they came on stage right after Snoop Doggy Dogg, which was just strange. One second you've got Snoop Dogg on stage with 2 other guys with microphones, and that was it. There was no one else on stage. It was just 3 dudes with microphones saying, "There's a party over here, fuck y'all over there."
Yeah, throw your hands in the motherfucking air! Wave the motherfuckers like you don't care!
I was totally not into, and everybody around me seemed to be into it, and it's like, okay, you're the same people who came here presumably to also see Tool, and whenever Tool came on, they just blew everyone else off the stage. I mean, it was a shambles. Probably one of the best concerts I've ever seen. This is before Maynard James Keenan started standing at the back of the stage in the darkness for some stupid reason. I've seen him several times. I think I've seen him 5 or 6 different times, and I've only seen him twice where Maynard actually stood out front. In '97 and again in '98 on an Ozfest, I think it was. And the first time he came out, he was wearing fake boobs and a big wig, and it was painted up like a clown. And it was an awesome show. It was just kick ass. The second time he came out as, Maynard the Preacher, and it was still an okay show, but I was really too far back, and it was really hot that day, and you couldn't get good sound that far back because, the wind, the air currents and everything just waft around the sound, and it just sounded like trash. I really didn't take to Tool immediately. They were a band that kind of took a minute for me to get in touch with, I guess, or get in tune with. And I think what I can most credit for that is
5 dried grams. Let me tell you, Our third eye was squeegeed quite cleanly.
But the reason I'm actually not holding up the Enema album and holding up their later Lateralis album is I used to have the album Enema, but it's a exceedingly rare in the original, and I used to have an original Enema album, but I sold it to buy a plane ticket to go meet my wife for the first time. She was in England, and we had been corresponding online and stuff for a while. And you know, I wanted to meet this girl, so I sold a bunch of my stuff. I sold a Les Paul, and I sold a Godin guitar that I had at the time, one of those nylon string ones, which I didn't care for all that much, by the way. It didn't sound great recorded, and also the neck wasn't straight on that thing, if I recall correctly. But I also sold that Enema album, and I got like $400 for that thing when I sold it, and it was actually I think up until that time. It was the highest selling one that I had ever seen on eBay. We're talking like 2004 or 5, something like that. It was interesting because all the other things that I sold to get that plane ticket to go meet my wife, all of that stuff brought top end or slightly more than what it should have brought based on past sales. So weird thing. It's like, you know, some force wanted me to go. And I do think that Enema and Lateralis, both of those albums, really stand up and deserve to be recognized as some of the greatest rock albums ever made. Particularly Enema. That album is just monstrous from start to finish. There are a couple of filler tracks on there that are just kind of, you know, sort of serve to lead you down the rabbit hole a little further before getting smacked in the face with another monstrous track. But, you know, other than those few little interludes, it is, from start to finish, it's an awesome album. I was kind of just looking at this album just now and realizing this thing came out in the year 2000, which is 18 years ago. My God. This is like half of my lifetime almost ago. Jeez. Oh yeah, a couple things I was going to show you last week before Big Brother unceremoniously cut us off. Found this at a local Goodwill. This is not very much, and it's got a mess up eject, and I'll have to fix that. I think it's rattling around in there. But for $3, I mean, and plus tapes are kind of making a comeback. Sort of like vinyl. I think people just have a nostalgia for the old stuff, man. I think we're kind of spoiled for choice on a lot of things, and that's what's kind of leading a lot of people back to wanting to do things the way we used to. You know, with cassette tapes. People would make a mixtape or something and give it to their friends. It's a little more intimate than just sending them a playlist, you know? Send them a link to a playlist. There's more of a connection there. It's like, and plus you get all the little imperfections and things that make something human. You get all the little stops and pauses and things in between tracks where you know somebody was loading the tape to dub something. You know, I kind of miss all that. It's definitely a case of we in the modern era being really spoiled for choice. And when you're spoiled for choice, you kind of develop a brain freeze, sort of. You know, it's like looking at the Starbucks board of all their options. It's like, you know, what do you want? Do you want a venti, cafe, latte? And what flavor do you want? Do you want hazelnut, or do you want it with, you know, you get all these different choices of things. And sometimes that's not for the better. It's cool that we can discover new things so easily that you can go on Spotify, or you can go on, what are some of the other ones, Rhapsody, or some, you know, some of the other streaming services, or you can go on YouTube and find new music and stuff that way. I've gone down the rabbit hole doing that stuff a lot. But, you know, having access to like basically all of the world's recorded music online already there for you is almost a bummer in a way. It takes away the thrill of the hunt, you know? Like when you would used to go in a record store or something, you wouldn't necessarily even know what you would see in there. Maybe it was something new. Maybe you wouldn't see anything new. Maybe you would get a bunch of old stuff that you've been meaning to get for a long time, you know, fill in some gaps in your collection or something. And you'd come out with some things that you would almost have to like, because, you know, you paid money for it. In a lot of cases, you paid a lot of money for it. In the CD era, you were paying, you know, at least $10, $15 for a CD if it was a new one. You know, you kind of had to force yourself to listen to some deep tracks and like some of it, or like most of the album. You couldn't just put it on and say, oh, I'm playing this one track and then let's skip to the next CD, because that's not going to justify your $15 expenditure. You have to listen to the whole album and try to like it, you know. So there's a lot of that too that's kind of missing now. You don't get albums so much of great music. They're fewer and further between all the time, it seems, and that's just indicative of the way things are headed. Speaking of albums, another thing I got at the Goodwill was this. This is a Technics turntable for, let's see, I don't know if you can see that or not, $7.99. So this is a model SLBD27. Missing the top, missing the dust cover lid, also missing the stylus. So I've already ordered the stylus. It does work, it turns, and it's got all the feet and everything intact as well. I've got another one of these Technics turntables where the feet are all broken and chewed up on it, so I might take parts off of that. I think that one has the dust cover, so I might make one good one out of the two. But for $8, I mean, I could throw it up into eBay as is and easily make my money back. One more thing I thought I might show you, since I have you, is a guitar that I've had kind of buried in storage for a while that I haven't dug out. This is a 1938 Epiphone Broadway. Not sure how well you're going to be able to see it. It's kind of in the shadows, isn't it? Like I said, it's kind of been put up for a little while, and I got it out because I need to play it. You know, tune it up, play some tunes on it. I've got this part, it fell off. It's got the kind of play where you would expect to see on something like this. Some chips in the finish. It's got the original Grover tuners. And this is when Epiphone was really Epiphone. This is well before the Gibson buyout, when they were still made in New York, and when they were pretty much the #1 competitor for Gibson. And you can just see the quality of the work is just really high. Nice inlays, great wood. I think the wood on this is, the back and sides are walnut. Top is spruce. And this one is from right after the Masterbuilt. Well, it's still called the Masterbuilt on the label, but it doesn't say it on the headstock. The slightly older one said Masterbuilt up on the headstock. But it's the real McCoy, and they sound fantastic. Now this one does not have the original tailpiece. Originally this would have had the two arm tailpiece, one longer than the other, that were gold, but somebody replaced it. The thing about those is the shorter one, you have to get really long set of strings for it to fit. So it's kind of better in terms of finding strings. It would have been nice to have the original tailpiece though. Other than that, it's all original. So yeah, great guitar. Definitely one of my keepers. I do buy and sell a lot of guitars, but this one will probably remain in my collection. And that's it. That's all for Shitpost Friday. And we'll see you guys next week. Hit the subscribe button to subscribe. Hit the bell to receive all notifications. And we'll see y'all later.